This is the famous Hamilton Road Presbyterian Church in Bangor, and for many, many years the Faith Mission held their conventions here every Easter. And in 1952, the Rev Duncan Campbell of the Faith Mission had returned from the Isle of Lewis, where God had been moving in revival blessing. The revival had started in 1949, and for almost 3 years the Spirit of God had been moving, and Mr. Campbell was invited to come home and come to this convention and address the people at the Bangor Easter Convention. Some old saints that I knew years ago who have been promoted to glory sat in the very meeting that Duncan Campbell preached at in Easter Monday of 1952. But during that time, a very unusual thing happened. God's servant was sitting in the pulpit. The chairman was leading the meeting, and God's servant, the Reverend Campbell, was booked to preach. And whenever the chairman sat down beside him, Mr. Campbell said, "I must leave the convention immediately after this service and go to a place between Lewis and Harris called Berneray. I feel constrained that I must go there." The chairman says, "But Duncan, you can't possibly go because you're booked to speak tomorrow at the final meeting of the convention." But such was the compulsion in the heart of Duncan Campbell, he felt he needed to immediately leave Northern Ireland, leave Bangor, and make his way back to this little island that has a population then of about 400 people. Nobody had spoken to him, nobody had invited him, nobody had called him, nobody had sent him a letter, but just sitting in the pulpit in Hamilton Road Presbyterian Church, Bangor, the Reverend Duncan Campbell felt constrained immediately after the service would be over to leave and to make his way back to Scotland, travel across from the north of Scotland to the Isle of Harris, and then from there get a ferry to this little island called Berneray. He had never been in the island before, he didn't know anybody in the island, but he just felt constrained that he must go there for whatever reason. He felt it was the Spirit of God constraining him. So after the service was over, he made arrangements to go back. He got the ferry first thing the next morning, across to Scotland, travelled up Scotland, North Scotland, went across to the Isle of Harris, and it was Thursday afternoon before he reached Berneray. And in the meantime, he still hadn't been contacted by anybody on the island, and he hadn't made contact himself. But whenever he got off that small ferry and was walking up towards the harbour, he saw a young lad who was about 14 years of age. And Mr. Campbell said, "Is there a minister on the island?" And the young lad said, "Well, the church presently is vacant, but the elders take the services." And one of the elders lived, and he pointed to a house just up on the headland. And Duncan Campbell said to the young lad, "Go to the house immediately, tell the elder that Duncan Campbell has arrived on the island, and if he asks who Duncan Campbell is, tell him it's the man that's been on Lewis for the last 2 or 3 years." So the young lad came back and said, "Mr. Campbell, that elder wants to see you." So Duncan Campbell went up to the house and spoke to the elder, and the elder on Monday afternoon had been in the barn praying that God would send revival to Berneray, and that he would send Duncan Campbell to the island before the end of the week. And his wife heard him praying, "Lord, I don't know where Duncan Campbell is, but you know. And Lord, you put it on his heart to come immediately to this island." And such was the conviction that that man had that Duncan Campbell would be on the island, that he organised a gospel meeting for the Thursday night and told everybody in the locality that Duncan Campbell was going to address the meeting and preach the word of God. And all the while there was absolutely no human contact between any of these parties. What a wonderful thing to know the leading of God in such a manner. And as God's servant preached, the Spirit of God moved, and God began to send a revival to that little island as well. Wouldn't it be wonderful to see revival? In revival, strange, unusual things happen that cannot be explained on the basis of the human. But God's servant Duncan Campbell could have said, like Abraham's servant, back there in the book of Genesis, I think it's chapter 24, "I, being in the way, the Lord led me." May we endeavour in these days to walk closely with our God, spend time in prayer, and most of all pray for the awakening that we really covet and crave and need in these days. Friends, thanks for listening. See you again next time.